Hi, everyone. Welcome to number 4 of See Chicago Dance's Dance for Camera workshop series. My name is Serinda Martinetti. I am See Chicago Dance's Community Engagement Manager. A few acknowledgements before we start. I am a light-skinned, biracial, Southeast Asian and European woman with short, pinkish purple hair. I'm sitting in my home office with large windows behind me, and I'm wearing a burgundy t-shirt. My preferred pronouns are she and her. And I'd like to also recognize that my home sits on the traditional lands of the people of the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, Potawatomi, the Ottawa, as well as the Menominee, Miami, and Ho-Chunk nations. I would also like to acknowledge the following statements. We work in different communities with different resources. We have different sorts of practice and aesthetics and politics. We use different language based on our own communities and situations, but we believe everyone in this room intends to be respectful. For this session, we seek to create an environment where people can speak freely without feeling worried that they will inadvertently offend someone by the way they speak. We come together to share, reflect, question, and learn. If you're someone who tends not to speak a lot, please, I invite you to move into a role of speaking more. And if you tend to speak more, I invite you to move into a role of listening. I would also want to let everyone know that this session is being recorded and released for later viewing. I think that's all I have to say. Let's get into it. We all know each other. We don't need to do introductions, so let's skip over that. And I'm going to hand it off to Enki.
All right. Hey, everybody. Good to see all your faces again today. I can't tell you how much fun this has been for me. It's been really great. And it's actually even helped some things that I'm working on. I'm like, oh, I really have to think about that fundamentally. So this has been great. All right. So I thought we'd review a little bit about what we covered already in the prior workshops. And just try to harness it into a kind of intention. So I guess this class is probably going to be tailored a little bit for the attendees, which is great. The first guest speaker that we had was Millicent Johnny, and she had spoken about story and how we pull a process for her of pulling story in by just looking at an image and saying like, oh, let's create a story from that, which is an interesting process, and also I thought it was neat to kind of add your projection, since so much of visual arts is about like your own imparting something to an image that you see and creating a story. You're watching a dance, and some people create a story in their heads. And there's interesting actually neuroscience around that, where we look at images, even stick figures and animation, and they're just like contrast things, and we create a story about it. And there's some thoughts that story is the way that we make sense of the world, and that our brain is actually a device to create story, and that we create meaning from story, and that maybe meaning is a byproduct of story. So that's an interesting just thought. Now the second speaker, Jenny, she had these kind of 4 elements, which were body, space, time, and quality. Right, where body was the physical camera, the apparatus, the instrument of capture. And then a second, perhaps, dimension was space, and that was perspective, blocking, and composition, the perceived spatial dimensions, or the captured spatial dimensions, as well as what was blocking and foreground, etc. Then the other dimension was time, where now we can manipulate time. We can make things faster, we can make things slower, we can reverse things, the nonlinearity, qualities of editing. At the time of capture, right, it's going to be linear, and once you're in editing, you can go backwards and forwards, and the impact that has. So we've got space, we've got time, and then she had effort or quality, which was the tone, the focus, maybe what the lens was focusing on, also the edit, and the style, or the quality of what the image was going on, and being affected, which would include anything that you might also do in the edit, which is in kind of a manipulation of the other three prior elements of body, space, and time. You're manipulating the camera for perspective. The space itself might be changed, what's coming across the lens, without camera movement or with camera movement, and then the time that you're manipulating in the edit. So those were, I thought, great kind of intellectual analysis of control. But I have a question for both of you. Why do we want to control these things?
It's how we create our story, where we want the viewer's attention to go, or whether it's we give them details or not, how much we leave to their imagination. So that's what I see.
Surinder?
To create mood and atmosphere of how we want to emotionally lead our viewers, or emotionally manipulate what's happening on the screen.
Yeah. Does anybody else, Frank or Kennedy, do you guys have any thoughts on the desire behind all this control, or has it been said?
Yeah, I would agree with everything that Surinder and Larissa said, but then also artistic expression, your own personal artistic style, or anything else like that you would want kind of linked between all the different things that you do, all the different dance films.
So aesthetic. So what you want to see aesthetically, what you find aesthetically pleasing, or how the look and feel and the moodiness of the film fits with your personal aesthetic, or how the story that you want to portray, you want a specific look to it, which is aesthetic.
My thoughts on this were that, all those aforementioned degrees of control in what the viewer will be shown. You get to control what the ultimate viewer will see on their rectangle or their device, and that the intent behind that, or to what end, we are increasing our sense of control. And so, if we all had $1 million to make a film, and you could hire, you could hire a camera operator, you could hire an editor, dancers, blah, blah, blah. We would have all the toys, right? Which we in many ways have already, right? Because we have pieces of equipment that, in comparison to just 20 years ago, are incredibly powerful. And the only thing we need really is a subject. Because location, we can always go to a fantastic location, also known as outside. So, I think for myself, some things, it's like, what is it that I want the audience to feel, right? It's almost an intention of manipulation, or to bring awareness to a kind of feeling, or to share that feeling that I experience, and say, hey, I've got this feeling that I want to convey. And I think feeling, along with story, like story is a kind of like intellectual interpretation, but then there's also the emotional story, which is the way you feel as the time passes. And that it's this juxtaposition between sequence and story and element, and then the feelings associated amongst all those feelings and tensions. And I think like that is one way to think about film, or really any art form, right? And particularly time-based art form, right? So in dance, we have, it's one of the few, well, not the few, there's music and there's dance, time-based art forms, but those two are so incredibly powerful that really thinking about that in the film space is yet another manipulation of those two elements, at least in movement of the body and in the sound and the emotional intentions that we have within them. And it's its own, in my experience with dance and film, the dance is its own thing. It exists, it's been designed, you have the lighting, you have the sequence, but once you place it in film, you are adding another kind of dimension to it. You have the potential to it. Now you could just shoot it straight and be like, I'm going to plant a camera here, I'm going to hit record, and it's just going to look at everything from this one perspective. But with film, we have this capacity to manipulate all that. We can manipulate the perspective, right? We can shift things around. And once we start doing that, as we push the boundaries of that, we can end up upside down. We can end up on top of the dancer. We can end up, changing the entire lighting of the thing. We can freeze the dancer. We can blur the dancer when they were not moving, and we can move the dancer when they were when they weren't moving. So film or video film is another, it's not just a recording. It has a transformative quality to it. And that's just something I wanted to put out there. So we're going to talk a little bit about emotion now, in thinking about our emotions. So how often do you guys think about the emotional intent behind your art making? Nice. You didn't want to match anymore. Yeah. So I don't know if you heard the question. Yeah. So what are your thoughts on what kind of emotion, what kind of effects that we've discussed so far would facilitate the emotions that you would like to create?
I think a lot of how I traditionally have created emotion, since I don't do a lot of dance work anymore, but in the past I used lighting to kind of like create, and music, of course, to create that emotive quality, as well as like movement and expression of the dancer. So I guess creating it with the camera is like, the type of shot that you want to do, whether it's, that the camera angles, how close you are or far away you are, that depth of field. And especially as we talk more about it, I'm really interested in how do you create something, or how can I create something that has very a minimal amount of movement, but really changing the depth of field to create more movement and an emotive effect through that, through what we're directing the audience to look at through the camera lens and focus. And especially like one of the films that we watched the other day, where there was a lot of close-ups on body parts, that you were very, very close. and how you create intimacy and emotion through, getting super close or just seeing something that comes sort of like in and out of camera view. And what does that do for the viewer, or what sort of emotion does that create when you're really close or really far away?
Yeah. So, we manipulate the lens and the position of the camera, like you were saying, depth of field, to create these intimacies, and close-ups are often associated with something more intimate. Sometimes people will compose a scene and they want to express loneliness, and so they'll have that character kind of isolated, and then the camera might like pull back, and then you're just seeing this more and more lonely figure, in the vastness of the space that they're in. And so those are ways of trying to convey the language of film, which is really kind of impressionistic, which I feel like it's kind of like more like a poem, where you have these arrangements and these juxtapositions of clips in your film, and the combination of these things is what results in a kind of emotional journey, which has to also be set up a little bit earlier, right? Because you begin your film, your story, your sequence, and you're kind of like training your audience to feel a certain way or relate a certain way, trying to get them to feel perhaps sympathetic with the character or to identify with what the character is going through. And you, or the filmmaker, can try to set that up, right? You say, here's where the filmmaker, here's where the character is. This is perhaps why they're there. And then there's this journey that happens afterwards. So I think there's an interesting space there to talk about dance versus some sort of story, because dance is a sequence, but story, I think we have sometimes very strong concepts of what a story is, right? And
well, because when you're thinking about like very contemporary dance, say Merce Cunningham, who approached his movement work from an aesthetic point of view, that the work on stage was really about the bodies moving through space, and in his mind there was no story, and he didn't want you to put a story on top of that. It was purely aesthetic movement. But like what you were saying before, of we create stories in our head. So I loved going to Merce Cunningham shows with friends who didn't know a lot about dance or movement, or maybe came from, one of my friends comes from a theater background, so we would go and I have all of the thoughts and feelings, and I'm like, I'm not going to say anything, and I want you to tell me what you saw and what you felt. And it just coming out of those shows that I can watch purely aesthetically, and watch these lovely bodies moving through space and these great shapes, and then this person just came up with this whole story of like, this person was doing this and this person was doing that, and this is who this one was, and this is what they felt. And I'm like, wow, I didn't get any of that. So story can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Like, it doesn't have to be like the story of, any kind of like linear, this is person A and this is person B, and they have this relationship, and then something happens and then it fractures, or story can be just a progression of aesthetic movement that resonates with us. So it doesn't have to like, once upon a time kind of story.
Yeah. Yeah, and I feel like dance is almost like really good at that, of like once upon a time. It's like, no, let's get away from once upon a time.
So I guess when we're talking about story, we're not just talking about that once upon a time linear progression of character A, character B. It can just be, I guess, that time progression of, introduction, beginning, middle, denouement. And if we're talking about like how a theater arc goes,
right.
Yeah.
So I kind of want to, well, I want to kind of bring this towards a question that's going to lead into the mini project. And so maybe we can get started on this a little bit sooner. And then I will have you I'm going to talk a little bit. The question is, I'm going to go with, what do we care about? And I just want that to fit in your brain. And then I'm going to start talking a little bit about some camera apps. So if we were going to make a film later this afternoon in a few minutes, I would ask you, what is it that you care about, that you would want to convey? Something, and I'm bringing this up because, back to process, like a poem, you can throw words on a page, right? And that's a perfectly valid process. You can also have perhaps a political intent. And by political, I just mean, you want something to affect society or your community by bringing awareness through your art. And in that case, like your art is serving a kind of intention independent of or in conjunction with a process. So we can also think of video, like, sticks, right? Where, we could wave around the stick. We could even build something, with sticks, and we could guide somebody with sticks. We have all this potential with our instrument and with our art form. But if you think about the difference between some sort of like perhaps semi-random process where you're working with sticks versus some very like political process where you're trying to affect society versus some sort of like structural process where you're trying to build something, there's a tremendous amount of different scales that you can achieve with just some of these natural materials of sticks. And like film, or not like film, but like sticks, film also, I think, has that capacity. So we can have a political agenda, we can have a structural agenda, we can bring an enlightenment kind of agenda, we can just be like a sharing agenda, we can bring an emotional agenda. So I would ask you, what is it, if you had $1 million,
or just entertainment, let's also say, like, we can create something just because we want to have something fun and beautiful.
Yeah. So what is it that you would like to create?
Do you want an answer?
I kind of do. Or not that you have to do it, but just like, I just want people to think about, actually, well, you don't have to have an answer for me, but I would encourage you to write it down. Write down what you care about. And then,
what if we don't know?
Right, which is fine, right? If you don't know, that's fine. But I think it's a good exercise to think about, what do I care about, so that it will guide your film, or guide perhaps even just your learning. Because you can say, it's nice to take courses in your interest, but if you have a project, a lot of times something is much more, you can get a lot more out of something, because you're like, I have this, I'm trying to achieve this, and I can learn this too, and you'll get a lot out of that, right? So if you can think about what you might care about, and then start thinking of this course and these exercises as a way to achieve that thing, or to gain better agency in that. So then you can start also then thinking about what qualities that we have discussed might help you convey what you care about. So
do you want to just like, let's connect those dots even more? What are those qualities that we've been talking about that help us convey? So it was like talking about the blur or the sharpness. I mean, it was talking about, you know, depth of field. What else did we talk about?
So we talked about, well, we talked about all these things are about, the reason we do all these things is to control lighting, right? Making something brighter or darker, because that affects kind of like what the viewer is paying attention to. If something's totally, you know, dark, like back here, we usually kind of ignore it. If something has a lot of texture, then we'll pay more attention to it. If something's a face, then we'll pay a lot of attention to it. And if something's moving, we pay attention to it. So there are different, there's tone to control the eye. There's texture to control the eye. There's blur that controls the eye or affects the eye. There's also, blur, and there's also movement. There's another space there, which is just like interpretation. Like sometimes you see something and I don't know what I'm looking at. Like, I don't know if it's upside down or if it's right side up, or what am I seeing? How do I interpret what is being shown to me? So when we control focus, we're choosing what's blurry and what's not blurry. So that's kind of like one way. Same thing with depth of field. We're saying, okay, this is in focus, and now we're going to shift focus back to some other place. If we're controlling exposure, then we're saying, let's bring this into a kind of like, well, bringing the exposure up to within the tolerances of the dynamic range of the camera that you're using, right? So like, I'm always backwards over here. This is blown out, and this is almost too dark for this camera. So we might want to bring up the light back on this side. I'm backwards, this side, and then bring down the light on this side. Which I can show, we can bring this up now. This is a good example. Where is, I thought I had it ready. Give me a moment. There it is. Okay. So there we go. So in this example, this is something called, I think it's one down, two up. And as you can see, those are f-stops, right? The numbers on the background, it says f1.4. And then the dark side of the person's face is, let me pull up my cursor here. There we go. So the dark side of the person's face is an f2.8. So this space here, oops, this is darker, this is brighter than the background. And when you're lighting somebody in general, if you want their face to be, to have a difference in lighting across their face, the difference between 2.8 and 5.6 is 2 stops. When you look at the lens of a camera, let me pull that handy. Let me pull up this. So the difference between 2.8, pull this here, the difference between 2.8 and 5.6, it goes from 2.8 to 4 to 5.6. So the range, it's 2 steps to get from 2.8 to 5.6. So we call that 2 stops. Is that in focus there? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So kind of in focus. Let me see if I can. Hey, Frank's saying yes. I'll listen to Frank because it's easier. So that's 2 stops, and the 1.4 is over here, right? So 1.4 is 2 stops below 2.8. So in total, for the photograph we were just looking at, the background was 1.4. The right side of the person's face was 2.8. And then the left side of the person's face was 5.6. For a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stops of dynamic range across the subject.
All because there was different light on the face, like from a source. And so that's because it seems like, like one side of it, the 2.8 side is a little bit dark. Yeah, I guess there's no question. I guess it was just an observation.
No, those observations are very important, right? Because when you are lighting something for a subject, and this ties directly into dynamic range, when you're lighting something for a subject, if the background is not 1.4, but if it's like -3, that's going to be pitch black. And then the subject will be kind of like just floating in blackness. And then if the right side of their face is blown out, then you're going to have tremendous contrast across their face from left to right. And it might be too much, right? You usually, oftentimes, most people don't go overexposure or underexposure. And this is kind of like the guideline for keeping your subject in dynamic range of the camera, and keeping a kind of roll off across, which is dependent on the size of the light source. Right? This was not shot on like a late afternoon, harsh day. This subject is being lit from the background. Now, what's I think a very important thing here is that the total number of stops across this image is 6. Right, counting up from 1.4 to 2, 2.8 to 4, and then 5.6. I'm sorry, that's only 5 stops. So that means you can get a nice image with just 5 stops. And that means you don't need a great camera with 14 stops of dynamic range to get a nice image, right? So you could buy an RE Alexa or something, or rent one, but it's not really necessary at all if you can control the lighting of your subject and the background. And the key take home I want you to get is that if you can control your background and the lighting across your subject and keep it within 5 stops, that's well within the range of any cell phone or DSLR. And that this is a good target of exposure. 2 stops across the face, and then one or 2 stops for the background. And from here, you can manipulate and you can increase the contrast of the background if you wanted to. I'm going to put in a quick effect. Let's go to contrast. So once you're here, you can increase the contrast if you want to, right? And you can make the background dark, and you can make this more dramatic. But once if you capture it in camera with this at this kind of native position, then you're safe to do that kind of manipulation. And you can also desaturate it. So if you start here, you're safe to get there. But if you start here, you can't. If you've lost your background information at initial capture, like if this background is not 1.4, but if it's at like -2, then your camera, you're not going to be able to pull up that information. Does that make sense?
It does. I get you. So if you, yeah. So it's that the original capture, like if means that you have more ability to change the end image to what you want, either plus or minus.
Exactly. Exactly. So like here, I can't dim this at, if I try to dim myself here, what's going to happen is that this is just going to get, it's going to go like straight black or something like that. I'm going to try to do it right now. If I reduce my brightness, it's okay, but it might barely be within the tolerances. But if it's blown out, it's kind of it's oversaturated and you can't do anything with it. So to your point, correct. Now,
so that really helps us in post-production when we're looking at what type of effect we want to use to create emotion or story or whatever, that if we have the ability, because we've got a good initial capture with light, then we can go one way or the other to a greater extent.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then in the, let me pull up my, okay, so it's just in B here. Yeah, so in this setup that I've had before, right? So where's my, oh, the cursor, hold on. Is it? Yeah, so let's say this is cell phone range, right? You don't want to capture something that's good for you, and you're like, okay, I still see grays up here, but the camera is not, right? If you have a cell phone, if the camera is saying it's blown out, then it's blown out. You can't do anything about it. So your human eye is not the reference that you want to be targeting. You want to work within the range of your camera, and usually cell phones have at least 5 stops of dynamic range. So if you just work within, from here to there, you're going to be okay. And then you'll be able to shift things, like you said, to dark or to bright. So, which brings us to camera apps. Yay, camera apps. Who doesn't love a camera app? All right. So the first app that I want to bring to your attention that I think is going to be beneficial to almost anybody who's using a cell phone. This works with Android as well as Apple. Is an app called Filmic Pro. So Filmic Pro is, let me shut down this thing. What am I in background? There we are. So Filmic Pro is the one on the top left, not the very top, but within the center section there, right? And that's what the app looks like if you go to the App Store. And on the App Store, it looks something like this, or a lot like this. Now, what this does is it allows you to control your shutter speed and your ISO. When you look at your regular cell phone app that comes by default on Apple, you have got this the star, the kind of like the sun spot. I'm going to try to pull it up real quick. So if I go into camera video, right? Is there? Oh, I got to switch back over to. So there we go. So within, and I can't even rotate it right now, but is there a little, yeah. So is that thing showing up there? Yeah, there it is. So you can see this little star thing, and it's making things brighter. I'm dragging that little sun thing in one direction, and it makes things darker or brighter, but it's only controlling the exposure. I don't have control over the individually of the shutter speed or the ISO. It's doing a combination in one app, which for our purposes is just not good enough. Oops, let me get this rotated real quick. Second. All right, there, it's rotated. So here within, oops. All right. So here in this app, you can see this. I'm going to give a quick overview for this because it's probably one of the best apps to get if you're going to shoot on a cell phone, which I think some of the audience is going to need. You've got the square, this thing here, the white square, that's your focus. If you tap it once and it turns red, your focus is locked. And that means,
so you can just move it with your finger.
Yeah, I'm tapping on it and then I can drag it around. And if this is all very planar right now, so everything's at the same distance. But if it was horizontal and I had some different depth, then I could switch the focus from like my hand. See the background shifted? Background, hello, background.
Mm-hmm.
Why isn't it changing focus? All right. Another way to change focus when this doesn't work is to go over to the left side and tap this this little circle thing, which you see a little A in the bottom left corner.
Mm-hmm.
And then directly to the left of that is like 3 dashes, and it's red now, right? This is the focus control. And on the right-hand side, here we go, I can drag this up and now I'm shifting focus from my hand to the background. You see that?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Okay, so that's a way to control the focus with this app. On the other side, over here, you see the numbers 136 and 1/48, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so the top number, 136, that is your ISO, right? That's what controls the grain of your camera app. So that can, when you want something to be brighter or darker, then you change that. And if I drag this, there's like a wheel on this side that I'm shifting around, and you can see those numbers changing.
Mm-hmm.
So now the numbers are going from like 137 or 200, right? And it's making things brighter. And the ISO, so the ISO is now 541. And if I go down, it goes down, down, down to, oh, I'm going to keep it where it says 124, to 36. So that is allowing me to control the grain that I have in the app that I'm using. The number below that, right, this number down here, 1/24, that's the shutter speed. Okay, so that's 1/24 of a second. The camera is open and closed. Now remember, there was a difference between shutter speed and frames per second. Frames per second is how many pictures are being taken in 1 second, right? And that is shown down here. Is that legible? Perceptible? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay, so you see there, it says 24 FPS, standing for frames per second. And then under that, it says 1080p. And I'll come back to 1080p in a second, but that's the resolution of the image you're getting. I'm going to be taking, with this setup, I'm taking 24 frames per second, and each individual frame is being exposed over here by 1/24 of a second, each one of those. If I shift this, now, what's the ISO? Anyone?
So 36.
Yes, the ISO is 36. What is the shutter speed?
1/96.
Correct. Have I changed the frames per second?
No.
Correct. I've not changed the frames per second. My film is going to be shot at 24 frames a second, but I can change my ISO and my shutter speed. And I'm just dragging this dial here. Right. All right. Any questions there? I'm going to pull up this other part here. So here's a kitty example. Right, so ISO is in the top, shutter speed is at the bottom, and focus is on the right-hand side. Yeah. All right, so no questions, or no, I don't want to lead any answers there. Any questions? I have no idea if there's anything in the chat. There's nothing in the chat. Okay.
I think we're
good. Okay.
good.
So
I'm good.
okay, you got that? Okay, good. All right, so now I'm not gonna go into depth in these other two. That's kind of the most important app there. The other apps are this one here, which is a video editor that I would recommend. I believe that's also for Android as well as Apple, called VN Video Editor. And I prefer this to iMovie on Apple because I can add layers. And I love to play with layers. So I think a VN Video Editor makes sense. And then another app that I would say is a good one is this thing called Slow Shutter Cam. And what that allows you to do is to really take a long exposure and kind of drag it across the image. And it works really well if you have a dark background and a light subject, then you can, okay. And so it gives you an app there. So Frank just mentioned that there's this native camera app in the Galaxy that has Pro Video. And you can control, Frank, you're saying it controls aperture and ISO. Okay, great. That's good. All right, so we've talked about now, so we got ISO under control, right? So we can make things brighter. We can also control the frame rate because we have control of the shutter. The other thing that we cannot control in a cell phone, and this is a major limitation of the cell phone, is we don't have control over the aperture. Right, so a second ago I had the lens out. I was showing you f2 to 5.6. We don't have those controls in a cell phone. I don't know of any cell phone apps that give you like aperture control, and even the range of aperture control in a cell phone is very limited. They usually go from like 35 millimeter equivalent of 2.8 to something like 5.6. It's narrow, and because of the geometries, it's you have to interpret it. Frank, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, yeah, mine is 1.5 to 2.4, and those are my only options.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yes.
Yeah. So if you want to control the depth of field, then a camera is very limited in that way. The only times it has good effect is what I was just showing you with my hand. When you have a foreground subject in the camera, then you have a decent chance of let me see if I can. So back to here, like I can control this when I'm really close to the camera, right? Then I can shift my focus if something's really close. I have the capacity to do that. But if somebody's more than 10 feet away, I no longer can control this focus effect. So camera apps do give you depth control if you're very close to the camera, like within 5 inches. But once you get basically 3 feet away, everything is going to be in the same focal plane. All right, so now real quickly, I also wanted to show the other setting, which has to do with resolution. Let me make sure I have my resolution image. Well, give me 1 minute. Yeah, which color grade? Here it is. Where'd it go? Oh, it's not. Oh. Oh well. I'll come back to that. Okay, so within this down here, you see it says 1080p. So that's your resolution, and 1080p is the vertical resolution of HD filming. So you've got 1920 by 1080. Maybe you've heard of that, which is like the standard. Let me see. The standard resolution. And I think even like some regular camera apps that are webcams are now coming out with 1920 by 1080, which is just your resolution that you have from your webcam. I'm gonna one second. Okay, great. That's what I wanted to show. Okay, so here you can see the. Make sure. You can see the resolutions on here. The largest is 4K, and that's 3,840 pixels horizontally, 2160p vertical, right? So that's 4K resolution. And that's many, many millions of dots and pixels on the screen. Full HD is the 1920 by 1080, which is what my camera is currently using, right? So in the camera app that I was just showing you here, 1080p is that, right? So it's using the smaller one, the full HD version. The step down from that is the HD TV, which is 1280 by 720p, and then smaller than that is the 720p. I'm sorry, the 720 by 480p, right? And those are to scale in the image that I've created here. So one good thing to note about all this is that you see how full HD is 1/4 of the size of the 4K in the image. So if you record in 4K, you're going to take up 4 times as much memory as your full HD. So whatever film you make, if you're recording and you get 1 GB per second with full HD, when you switch to 4K, you're going to go up to 4 gigabytes per second. So the higher resolution takes up more memory is the take home from this. And also when you're shooting on the, if your film is not going to be displayed on a 4K display, then there's not really much reason to shoot 4K because no one's probably going to see it in 4K. And also, even the top cameras, many of them don't even record in the actual sensor at 4K. They're still recording at 1080p. And I think even some of the RE cameras are also using, I think, 720p. They have a very small sensor, but they're very good at dynamic range. My point being, you don't need to have a huge sensor in order to get a good image. What you need to do is control the light that you have on your subject, and that image will look great as just with that. So hopping back to the app here, to change your resolution, if for some reason you don't want to shoot at 1080, you click on this dial. I'm going to pull the focus thing. I'm using the square, but just as an example of highlighting something. This little gear icon in the app, that's where you can control. That's where you can control your resolution. So I'm going over here to the top left where it says resolution. And here you can see I've set it to 1080. And I can tap left on the left arrow to reduce the resolution down to 720, which is probably even more accurate for what's being sent to Zoom right now. But this is how you would control that. You can go 720, and I think it goes up to 2K and even 3K. Now it looks, it goes to 4K, and that's phone dependent. So that's the way you control resolution on this app. And then next to it is frame rate. And you recall that on the left here, we had this 24 frames per second. That's where you can change this here is in the gear in frame rate. And you can change your frames per second captured. And the reason we wanted to do that was because we'd have a slight blur when there's motion, and it lets in the most light. If I shoot and I have a frames per second of like 30, then I'm taking 30 pictures in 1 second, which is less time exposed than if I had taken 24. So when you increase your frames per second, you're not giving as much time for light to come in. Consequently, things are a little bit dimmer, assuming a constant source of light that doesn't change across your shooting time. And then there's other controls there. And you can turn on guides, etc. All right, here we are. I've gone over time, which is all right because I have a plan for everyone. Oh, I thought somebody was raising their hand, and it was me. Mini project. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to kind of take advantage of cell phones. And I'm going to ask everybody to actually shoot with their cell phone today. Even if they have a good camera, don't use it. Use the cell phone. Well, actually, maybe people don't have, if they don't have the app, then it might not be so well. Does, Surinder, do you have a DSLR or mirrorless?
Yeah, I've got a DSLR mirrorless. I also just got the app, so I've got the app on my phone. I was going to play around with it.
Okay, great. And Larissa?
I was going to get the app too.
Okay. Okay, great. All right, good. So go ahead and get the app. Those are the very basics. You just need to know how to set up your resolution. I think for our project here, I wouldn't even go even to 720. 720 is fine for resolution because it'll just make things faster to upload. And that doesn't matter so much. So given that cameras have a slight dynamic range, I want everyone to take 15 minutes and to make a, let's say, maximum 30-second film. And it's going to be black and white, right? And minimal gray. If you can have no gray, that'd be even cooler for today. And so what I want you to do is I want you to manipulate the ISO and your shutter speed in order to make a black and white high contrast film. So we're going to lean into the limitations of the cameras that we have. And I assume you don't have any ND filters for this, and that's okay. So a quick thought is like, well, how are you going to control? But I've already told you, you're going to control exposure with your shutter speed, right, and your ISO. Now, emotionally, back to the kind of beginning of the class today, the emotional question, being driven by the camera body itself and the app. Who sees things in black and white? So these are questions for you to think about yourselves. What's the character of such an individual? And can you incorporate that character into your film today? And so the other thing is that since most of us are probably working alone, then your camera is probably going to be in one location, right? So if your camera is in one location, who sees things from one perspective? And how are you going to incorporate that single perspective into your production? And how will that lens choice, how will that perspective affect your lens choice? Now, I didn't show you, but within that little gear section there, there's a button that says lens, right? Down here, there's the, I'm gonna have to quit there it is. It says camera. Within camera, I think you have choices for your, and next to the gear, right next to that, that's also where you can control your lenses. So actually that's even easier. So right next to the gear, you see the little angle thing. That's your lens choice. If your cell phone has two lenses. So black and white, who sees things from one perspective? Who sees things in black and white? How is that going to affect your production? And then you're going to make your film, have fun with it. And then we'll do 15 minutes for the filmmaking, and then we'll add a 10-minute break to that in case people are running a little bit late. Upload it, and then we will have a discussion. Any questions? Sure, go ahead.
Is there something on the app that lets you just record in black and white?
Great question. Let us hop into the app again. Guess who's excited? All right, so look on the left-hand side. There's the three little circles.
Yeah.
In color. I've just tapped there. And then if you go down to, the third one down, as you can see there, it's got that curve. You have options for those. You can reduce your shadows or your highlights. That's another way to control things. And then I think, where's the saturation? The button below that allows you to reduce saturation and reduce vibrancy. And now we have this.
Somehow it's saying I need a cinematographer kit.
Oh, in order to use that, the bottom one? That might be, that might be true. Where the cost of the app, what's the total cost for the app and that cinematographer kit?
Well, the app was like $15.
Well, if you don't want to get that, do you have Android or which app do you have? Which platform are you on?
I have an iPhone.
Okay, so what you can do is just record it in color, and then when you take it into iMovie, I think you can reduce you can desaturate there.
Okay.
Is that true?
I don't know. I don't use iMovie anymore, so.
Okay, well, whatever are you going to be, or you can just get the cinematographer thing. If you're going to be shooting with the cell phone in the future, I think it's worth it just to get the app, get the cinematographer thing, and then it'll open up all the options there. And also you can transfer that if you upgrade your phone, and you buy it in the app store, you can transfer the app to your next
Okay.
phone. So you don't lose it once you upgrade.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions? Oh, I highly encourage everybody to shoot outside because it's sunny. And if it's sunny, you have a lot of light. And if you want to overexpose something, the sun is very helpful for that. So
Do we
take
have enough
advantage of-
time? It seems like, I mean, I feel like I'm always rushing.
I know.
And then now we're thinking about story and character. I'm like, I don't. Enki, you're stressing me out.
Oh my God, the pressure. I just want
Such
everyone
pressure.
to know, I expect all your films to win Academy Awards in the next 15 seconds.
I know I can shoot something, but I'm not sure if it. I don't
Right. And the whole purpose of the exercise is just to have fun, learn how to use the app, learn how to do, so, hopefully it won't work. And then hopefully you can come back and you can be like, why wasn't it working? I was trying to do this and it didn't work. And then we can talk about it and be like, oh, that's how I do it. And then you'll just get a little bit better. So don't get stressed about not working. If the worst thing that can happen is it goes exactly as you planned and you learn nothing. All right. Well, Larissa is already off to the races.
my God.
Not that it's a competition.
Okay, so we're meeting back here in 1:15. All right, I better get. Well, it's 1:15 now.
All right. So when are we coming back?
1:30.
No. Let's give you 15 minutes and then take a 10-minute break.
So 140.
1:25. 1:30. Yeah,
140.
1:40.
that's a lot of time.
It is. You're going to take 15 minutes.
15
then
plus
you're gonna-
10 will be 140.
All right, I can't count.
Okay. See you at 1:40.
I couldn't initially get my film out of Filmic.
Oh, you couldn't export it.
Well, eventually it did, but I don't know why it took so long. It just I couldn't get it out for a while. I'm like, this is great.
Yeah. I wasn't paying attention and I'm not sure what resolution I recorded it at. So it turned out to be like the wrong one. So, but later it said, oh, you can downgrade it. So I will see what happens there. All right, I put it in the Discord under workshop 4.
We lost Kennedy. What happened to Kennedy? Oh,
I think she asked in the chat there about what was the app. So I did post it. She might be running a little bit late trying to download, install, blah, blah, blah.
all right. Well, we can get this.
Yeah, the other thing, I was able to do it because it was so short, but my phone is pretty full up. And so if I'd had to spend time like deleting stuff off to have room, like I would have lost more time. So
Yeah.
Just as like, if you do something again with the phone, warn people so they have room.
That's it. Well, I mean, I think this is good that it's being recorded. That's like one of the, if is it okay to start the kind of class now, or should we wait for? No? Okay. So yeah, things that we learned, which is, as you said, go ahead and well, yes, you want to
Yeah, you just want to make sure you
have-
have enough room on your phone. I mean, when I know I'm going out to video, I do like clear off a ton of stuff, but I wasn't quite expecting to use my phone today. So when I went to hit record, it's like, you may not have enough memory. Do you want to record anyway? And it's like, yeah.
Yeah, so that's, I think, one important lesson for anybody who's going to be filming, no matter what platform you're on, right? Is make sure you have enough memory space and an abundance of that. Make sure, and if you're going to shoot in anything over 2K, then you really want to double check that and make sure that you have enough space for 4K or whatever, because there's not much you can do if you're out shooting someplace and then you have a memory and you're like, oh, I didn't realize it would take up so much.
Right.
I've heard absolute horror stories. I don't know if you guys know about the black magic. which is a camera that was like one of the first to shoot in 4K, or it's in 2K, and then they have an internal hard drive, or the cards that like it literally was like 5 minutes. Like that's how much you could record. We had to go switch them out, and you needed at least 4 because you needed to offload the other card to continually loop that around. In addition to, of course, the battery only lasted 20 minutes. So, it was just whatever. That's a quick shoot camera. High quality quick shoot camera. They're just, oh my God, the extension cord these guys are bringing out. They're like, we got to plug it in, otherwise it's not going to work. And then you got to have like this, 5 terabyte external hard drive just kind of attached to your hip to be able to record without constantly having to stop and change up. So, just what Enki was talking about with the amount of data some of this stuff starts to take up and how long. I mean, you really do need, what's the person's name that goes out and switches the cards and everything? You had a name for it, and you were right. I totally forgot what it was.
Yeah, I forget. I don't think
DMT, data management.
Yeah, the DTI.
DTI or something like that. Yeah, data technician, instrumental, something like that. There's somebody's job. That's all they do.
And it's interesting that is also kind of like history repeating itself, where in the film days, you had to change your film cartridges and you had so many feet of film, and if it filled, you were going to stop. And so you weren't going to have a film that was going to be longer than 5 minutes. And that was it. So then now digital, same problem, but they've kind of overcome that both with film. But now we have even better with just our cell phones that we can shoot for like 3 hours, and we're like, I don't care, it's going to go, and I'll crop it later. So what are the purely logistical things did we learn from this process?
It took a little while for me to like futz around in the app to be like, where did it save? I don't know where to find those clips. I took multiple clips, and then I'm like, okay, now I need to take those clips off my phone onto my computer. How do I do that? And then I still just don't really know how to use iMovie. So then since I shot it in color and then was going to all right, well, I'll do all of the contrast in iMovie, except I didn't really know how to do it. So I think the clip that's in there is just like one section, whereas I had a story that changed, and I was going to go from color to black and white, but then I can't work out how to do that. That's editing, which we haven't covered. And then I got really stressed and I just put something in there.
Okay. Well, it's all for fun. So go ahead and upload the one that you have in color. And then we'll look at that as well. Because, just getting a little detail, that's something you'll learn in 5 minutes, and then you're like, okay, I know how to do that. And it's better just to play. And if you make mistakes, fine.
Should we go ahead and start looking at some of these?
I wanted to also just talk about a logistic thing that I know that was re-emphasized for me, is that if you want to make our goal was what, a 30-second film, 45 seconds, something, right? And then how much time did we need to actually do it?
Depends
I
on
didn't
how
have
much.
enough time.
No, I didn't either, but it also depends on what your goal is, like how refined, and not that more time is always better. But when you also have audio, which we haven't talked about so much, there's a lot of things that you can bring in that take more time.
Yeah. So I think that's I think my experience with this is that you need to be realistic about how much time it takes for you to do something. And in fairness, I feel like if you want to get to get started, right? We're starting from scratch. You're like, I have a project. I'm leaving now to go film. You really need probably like an hour just to get going in the beginning setup. So give yourself an hour, no matter what you're starting. If you're trying to make a 30-second thing, give yourself an hour of setup to make sure you have all that. That's just on the front end. And then you can kind of fine tune things in this location, that location, blah, blah, blah. And then on the back end, like Surinder was saying, you're like, how do I export this? Can I change this setting? I thought blah, blah, blah. You need another probably like hour to get to know the app that you're using, so that you can be like, and that's kind of per app. So if you get a new app, let yourself, give yourself at least an hour to muck with it, if not more, before you're like, oh, I'm going to go to this project. Give yourself an hour, learn how to do the whole workflow, ingestion, then use the app, play with it, and then export. You're like, oh, I need another hour to get it out the way I want it. And I might have to go back and reshoot something, and be like, that didn't work at all the way I thought. I need to go back. So, 3 hours from scratch isn't unreasonable. And then as you gain more experience, you're like, okay, I know how to do that. I know how to do that. And you can tighten that down to perhaps an hour. But in fairness to film and video, that's not uncommon. And then editing is its own thing. Editing for me takes an hour to produce 1 minute of video. And then we didn't even deal with like lighting. If you're going to be lighting something yourself and arranging that lighting apparatus, then you need time, depending on how much crew you have, to get your light set up, as we were talking about the 2 across, actually it was three stops across from left to right, 2.5, 2.8 to 5.6, and then your background. So to get that set up, if you're going to actually control lighting, then you need to give yourself enough time and practice so that you know how to do that. And those are all like the logistics of filming anything that you want to have a decent amount of control over. You can't just get lucky, but if you rely on luck when you're trying to do something with a lot of control and perhaps nuance, and you want the emotion to kind of go this way, give yourself time to practice that and do it more than once. So let's look at the films. And then what I was thinking, actually, there's a film I think ties into all this, which is the Maya Deren film. So I was thinking what we could do is we'll review our films, talk about them a little bit, and then I think it'd be good to look at the Maya Deren film, which is a black and white film. And I think I've got more than one of those. I can text Dan's film links. Yeah, At Land, the Maya Deren film, At Land. And I thought that might be a nice film for people to look at, since she's one of the pioneers of film and dance. So Frank, Surinder, you look like you're still uploading. You've got upload face.
I did put something in there, but it's not the full thing. So I'm kind of like redoing it to see if I can, so.
Yeah, so this is Larissa's.
Yay. Nice. You're ready for Halloween.
Yeah.
Nice. And you had a strobe going underneath?
Yeah, I have lights for my drone that will they're really powerful, and I can put them on a mode to blink. So that's what I used. Yeah.
Okay, nice. And then what did you layer with?
It's just layered over it. Same. I had maybe a minute, and I layered, 30 seconds over 30 seconds.
And you did this in iMovie or?
No, what's that other one called? DaVinci Resolve.
DaVinci, okay.
Yeah.
All right, good. And what did you learn from?
I mean, I haven't used this app before, and so that's new. And then I've never converted anything to black and white in DaVinci, so I had to go find a YouTube thing because I'm like, where is this? Like,
okay.
So.
And did you learn anything else about the layering, or anything else came to mind that you discovered?
Well, I mean, for anyone listening, I actually kind of like DaVinci, even though I don't know all the ins and outs, because it has layers and you can put effects of the layers as similar to like in Photoshop with layers. So if someone has, a photography background, it's kind of cool to be able to do that. Yeah.
All right, Frank, what's next?
All right, Surinder just put hers up, so let's do that one.
It's a mystery as to what we'll actually see.
Nice.
If I had more time, I think what I would want to do is go from that color saturation and then gradually go into the black and white, and then maybe bring back like one color at the end when we see the skull. What I wanted, that progression that I wanted to do. But
You're more ambitious than I was.
And for both of you, did you think about what was the character of the camera? How did character influence at all the perspective that the camera had?
Well, yes, because I was thinking about like death, and then going from life to death, or kind of like the life cycle of the plant. So that's why I wanted to start with something that was vibrant color with the flowers, and then you see like my tomatoes withering on the vine, and then the angel, and then the skull, which represents, which is death.
Okay. And how about you, Larissa? Was there any character behind your camera?
Well, when you gave us the assignment, at one point you said, well, you probably have a fixed camera or something. And I actually usually don't. I'm usually moving quite a bit. And so it was like when I'm zooming in, it's me moving for the details. It's not really a character maybe, but I don't tend to just set a camera and then work within the frame. As the eye of the camera or whatever, I'm moving and trying to capture different things.
Okay.
I want to see yours again, actually. Can we do that?
Sure. Okay. Cut there, replay it, cut it out, and put it back in. So go ahead. Any further thoughts on seeing that the second time?
I liked the movement of the camera, and then the movement and the sound of the skeleton, that it definitely we have a certain point of view. Yeah, I like it.
Yeah. I thought it was what I got from that with viewing it the second time, I'm glad we saw that a second time, is you there's you increase the contrast on one of the layers, and it was like super high contrast. It seemed that I
I think it's just the lighting.
oh, okay,
Yeah.
well, great accident, but it blended, I thought, nicely. Like the transition I thought worked really well because there was like a effect of high contrast, and the transition worked really nicely there. So I think that's like an interesting thing that happens when you do two layers. What you're paying attention to, like your eye kind of goes towards what it can see, and so it sees the high contrast, the super bright. And then if you bring in something that's maybe a grayer, then it can shift kind of easily into that. It's not this jarring, like I'm in this perspective and I'm in this, and now I'm in this other one.
I think it was just a happy coincidence because the strobe
Mhm.
gave high contrast, but maybe the point where I overlaid, the strobe was off, so it was not as much contrast. Yeah, I think it was just a happy coincidence.
Right, and I think that that's excellent because it's happy coincidences that when you can recognize what you did and you're like, oh, I should use that again later, because you start putting together happy coincidences and you start actually learning something, and you're like, ah, I'm going to do that on purpose, or I know what the effect is for that.
Right,
I feel
right.
like all of human discovery is a consequence of happy accidents. All right. Frank, do you would you show mine, please?
Sure. I also did one this time.
Oh, great. Let's see yours.
Yeah. Great. It has no sound. I can...
Cool. Like this.
Love how simple it is, seemingly.
Yeah, well, I had the camera like this close to my face. And originally I started with incense, but incense doesn't make enough smoke. So I had to go with the pipe. I took the noir very seriously, like a detective waiting for somebody to come back.
Did you learn anything? Was there anything that you kind of discovered in the process?
Yeah, I would have loved to had a pop on the pipe itself, but I only have so many hands. And pop just like to reflect some of the natural light so that it would highlight the outside of the bowl itself, so you could really see the smoke coming out. But yeah, no, I mean the big thing I found out was that my phone already has something that allows me to kind of do that stuff where I can pull focus, and which is actually kind of interesting. I'll have to start using that more often.
Yeah, and it was nice how separated you had, how much separation you had just by focus with the pipe in the foreground and then that nice blurry background, which I thought worked to kind of like great effect.
Yep.
Which is something that you can't do with a regular DSLR camera or even a better camera. You need very special equipment if you're going to do a close up with a super blurry background. But now we all have cell phones, and there's things you can do with a cell phone. It's a specialized camera for it can do close ups. So if you need to do a close up, it's a fantastic camera for that. Better than most other cameras.
Yeah.
All right, last one.
Were we going to watch yours, Enki?
Yeah.
Yeah. Frank, can you cue that up?
Yeah, I'm pulling it up now.
Very cool.
So is that a shadow, the movement that we were seeing, or was that an overlay of another image?
It was both. There was a shadow. It was actually two, I think actually 4 shots, 2 overlaid followed by another 2 overlaid. And I just put it in high contrast and picked I picked a low perspective, which is actually kind of confusing now, but I picked a very low perspective because I was like, maybe ants or some small animal sees things in black and white. So I was like, let me shoot it from a very low angle and high contrast. And then I layered those 2 things just to see what the effect would be. And then I exported it with as low a bit rate as possible. So it's like 1 megabit per second or something like that, which had some strange effects going on. I don't know if you could see that, shot against stone. So the glitch pattern that appeared was something that I need to look more into, because it's not just a straight pixel noise thing. It has a kind of structure to it, almost crystalline.
Yeah, I was going to say it looks a lot like ice. It looked like we were shooting through ice.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
what
like
I saw.
ice or transparent stone or something.
Right.
Yeah. So, just another random discovery. I use the VN app, which is something that I just heard about, which is this one there, the VN, under the Filmic Pro, and that allowed me to layer just in my phone, which I didn't know it was really that. I don't think you can do it in iMovie, so that's just another app that I found there that does that. And other things I discovered there. I guess it's kind of interesting, like the way your eye works. We have great actually whole neurology in order to determine and detect vertical lines, right? So we're really good about detecting vertical lines and continuous lines, right? Continuation of line. But when things start getting fractally, like bugs and nature and leaves and stone, then that's how moths hide on tree trunks, because they blend with the environment, because we're not good at figuring out the contours of something that's a non-continuous straight line. So just camouflage is an interesting concept to work with, and separating form from background. It makes me think that if I wanted to, I could put in a tremendously messy background in black and white and have it be just chaos. And if I put in a foreground dancer or character that's in color, I think we would detect things really easily, like they'd be separated strongly. So that might be an interesting experiment, just to say, I'm going to use an actually noisy background, which normally is bad, but if it's noisy enough, it'll pull out the foreground subject in a way similar to focus, where our eyes is attracted to what's in focus and we ignore what's blurry. But this way, our eye might also ignore what's too complicated and be like, I can't even process that. I will just look at what I can process. So maybe that's
maybe what's in movement.
That too.
Mm-hmm.
So another space to kind of like explore how to create separation. And then that might also be a space where you can change depth, where we use focus to determine what is far away and also what's near. And also like the boundary of something. If this is all boundary, like Frank's film, then we're like, okay, this sharp thing is probably in the foreground. But we might be able to play with that by saying, oh, let's take a foreground subject, make them black and white, and then let's switch the black and white subject from foreground to background. maybe I can create a mock-up of that in my software here. But anyway, it's just something I can think about from that experience. Any other thoughts around this little exercise that we did?
Well, I want to go back now and like spend more time on mine so that I can actually get the contrast that I want to kind of fade out and then back in again.
Okay.
And to see how that changes things or not.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Let's see how that goes. So I'm gonna hide that. So now I think it'd be nice. Where do I have this? How are we on the structure of time? Workshop 4. Oh, okay, they're all right there. Where we're at, we're 2:15. Let's look at the Maya Deren piece first, and then I'll talk a little bit about lens effects. Yeah, the Maya Deren at land. I think it would be an interesting thing to look at now. It's tied in more with story, but we'll see some effects there. So what were your thoughts about that film?
Very dreamlike. How in reality, what would be disparate locations somehow fit together, and sort of certain continuities that more show up maybe in our dreamscapes, less than in reality. But I see, with the chess and then the chess at the beginning, at the end. And so no, it's very well done. Very interesting.
I missed a couple of minutes because I had to answer the door, but I felt like, I was trying to figure out what the story was and where she was going. But I think to me, overall, it felt like we're watching the arc of a life from birth and growing up and having family and, then kind of like back to death. It felt like a life cycle to me.
Okay. How did you feel? Any thoughts about the movement
of the camera or her?
Yeah, both. And then the interplay there.
I thought there was a moment where, like, when she was climbing, that it was actually, we saw it in reverse. So she was climbing up, but we saw it as climbing down. Mm-hmm. And I really like that movement, how it sort of changes your perspective rather than filming it climbing, filming it climbing down and we watch her climbing down. Movement wise, it was, fairly simple, more like pedestrian, everyday movement, nothing that was like codified or necessarily what we would think of as dance, but it was definitely a very movement based piece.
Yeah, speaking to the backwards, the early on at the beginning with the waves, when they edited, they put the waves in reverse. They were going normal initially, and then they reversed them as like it's an offering. She was an offering up by the waves or something. I don't know. Yeah. And they didn't do a lot of wide angles at the end a little bit because she's running down the beach. But overall, it was tighter in following her hands or her feet or her facial expressions.
Yeah. So, this film was, I believe it's from the 1940s. It might even be earlier. I should know that, but Feel free to correct me there. And at that time, think about how limited people were in their camera movement. People were really still in this like locked off, let's not disorient anybody. Cameras were huge, and it was very hard to move them. And also, so for that reason, people were keeping them still. And then also, just from a film history standpoint, there was hardly any film history comparatively to now. So she was, being a dancer, really pushing film and dance at a time when people were still learning just about the camera and like, oh, this is how a camera works, this is a perspective. And a lot of people were like, you put it down, you record what happens, and then that's it. And you cut that, and then you say, okay, now we're in another scene and someone will do that. So she was really playing with this whole, what is space? How can I create a story, a character, which way does time go? What is arrival? What is exit? And also like, what is visibility? Am I even being seen in this scene with, the table and stuff like that? What does chess mean to?
I really liked some of those enclosed spaces. And especially that last image of her opening and closing all of those doors and going into those tight corners. I mean, I came back in when she was like crawling through and she emerged at the chessboard. And so I was wondering like how, if, I was thinking, well, if this is a trajectory of a life, is she a voyeur in her own life or someone else's? And just the perspective of like those enclosed spaces that the camera gave us. I mean, knowing that this was from the 1940s, that's really radical for the time period, right? Like it's still kind of radical for now, when you're looking at film and how we view a lot of that. Like it's very contemporary for now. Like it could have been made this year and everyone would be like, that's still a really great, effective film. But yeah, that blows my mind that it was made in the 40s. Like,
Yeah.
I look at it more as a story about a woman trying to find herself, trying to find who she is. And like coming up on the chess scene or whatever that she was doing, maybe thinking, okay, well, society says I do this. So she shows up, but no one sees her. So it's like, okay, well, that can't be me then. If no one sees me, where do I fit in this place called the world or whatever, life?
I question whether she's even really human.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering, like, is she a manifestation of the sea in human form, exploring, this Homo sapien terrain in the form of a Homo sapien, but really just an interloper.
Mm-hmm.
And that's my story for that, my own narrative in my head is I'm like, well, maybe that's what's happening. Maybe she's not human. She just looks like a human. And so her engagement with the world is both present and the way she crawls and moves and what the meaning of any of these objects are to her, other than a kind of obstacle. And I think I'm just very impressed with this person's vision of exploring medium, which I feel like dance has, like that's where dance really has a deep grounding. And in the really neat shows that I've seen of dance, people are expressing perspectives that are not within some sort of like, this is a character, she's 5 years old and this is her parents and this is the backstory, and it's not so rigid or even like trying to find culturally centric, trying to fuzz that boundary of what is a culturally centric perspective on existence. And I feel like dance has that capacity to really explore that on the stage or wherever it's performed, what is being. And I think film also can complement that by giving you these controls over time, like you were saying, going backwards, and perspective, scale, all the manipulations that we can do with this medium in combination with a medium that is exploring and perhaps trying to fuzz or explore the differences of what is being, for the human condition through another artistic expression. So that's why I'm so perhaps zealous is appropriate about really pushing the boundaries of the equipment that you have, of being like, you don't have to film, medium shot, close up, full body. You can go in and out, you can create a layer, you can do, mix and find something magical happening. And then I feel like go into that, think about your emotion, think about what you're feeling, what you want to feel, and then what in your learning about this technical medium of video, what reminds you of those feelings, and can you create headway, like a tree that's breaking through, some soil. It's like, can you use the film to break through into an emotional space that you haven't gone before? And will it, I don't know, discover an avenue. I feel like you should trust that. You trust your emotion to guide you. And in dance, you do that. And I think people go really, really far. And I want people to use film and go really, really far and not be like, well, everybody shoots like this, so I will too.
We, and by we, I mean me, dance because that was the only way that I knew how to express myself, because I didn't have the ability to articulate in words what I really wanted. So how do I, and I'm thinking about how I now use the camera as another dancer to articulate what it is that I'm thinking and feeling, to say something about the world and to tell a story. Since, as my body doesn't move as much as it used to, and that's okay. So how do I still use movement as a focus to create a dance film, that has meaning and interest and says what I want it to say, because I don't know any other way to say it.
Yeah, and when I speak with dancers, that it was the consistent story. When we did this big tour around the world, and I'm not a dancer, so it was interesting to hear this expression from so many people, that there were things that they could express through movement that they were not words for. And I think that is huge, and that's what needs to be explored. I think a lot of people, especially writers, that's their comfort space is words. And so they're like, okay, and they've been great at it. And they're like, let's arrange words, let's use poetry, and let's create these juxtapositions. And I think poetry is a fantastic example, because there are spaces there, you read some poetry and you start, you're like, I'm tripping out on just the poem, the ideas that are emerging from some characters. And I think dance does the same thing, but it's pre-verbal. And so I feel like lean into that weird space of, okay, I can't use words for this. Can I use film for this?
Larissa, I'm really interested, as a person who doesn't use movement the way I use movement, since you're coming from a very photography, videography background, like, what is it that you're interested in working with movers, that you want to say? I don't know, how is any of this useful for you?
Well, I mean, I know there's a lot of overlap between photography and videography, but at the same time, they're there's some big differences. And on the video side, I'm very much more self-taught. I don't know the vocabulary to talk about, and I'm very much more maybe intuitive because I literally have no training. But I started, I'm a little bit more on the documentary side, I would say, of dancers and performances. I'm involved with an ensemble here that has a couple dancers, and so for their performances, okay, you can set up a tripod, and anyone can set up a tripod or a little, put a camera on it, document the performance. However, over the years, we've had some occasions where we don't really have an audience. So I'm actually, they're just jamming. And so I can actually get in there and move around them and with them. And over the years now, I know some of the dances, like I know more or less what the dancers are going to do. And so like the couple that you had on the first session, Irene, and I don't remember the videographer, last summer, she did was it just the two of them, or was there a third dancer? I think it was just the two of them. So my friend who's a dancer, the two of them did a pop-up dance in a parking lot, which for me was great because it was a drive-in performance because of COVID. So I could actually walk. I mean, I was literally on there filming as they're moving around. So to me, that's way more interesting. And then we produced a short, I don't know, it might be about 3 minutes. We produced a video out of it to represent. So it's not a it's documentary based, but it's not just a camera set up and it's just a straight angle or whatever. So back to your question, I'm still getting into maybe understand it, like maybe eventually having an idea that I would want dancers to express. I've always been more on, it's a bit more of a collaboration, and I know these dancers, I know what they're trying to do, and I'm become the visual expression through video of that, sort of a translation. I would say, there is a documentary base to it, but not only. So
I'd be really interested to see you as more of a director as well, or a facilitator of the dance. I mean, you don't need to be a choreographer. We can talk about this offline of like how you can do that to express what you want to express through dances, through the use of structure and improvisation. And
right.
So you give the tasks to the dancers of something that you want them to do, but it's their movement and their interpretation of what
we do a little bit of that because we're going to be working on, we were all in Mexico in July. And so the video footage I have from that, I know that we're going to, thinking in advance. So I'll ask the dancers separate from the perform, because there we had audiences. I couldn't like do what I like to do exactly. So separately, I do ask dancers, like, can you, just come up against this wall and, that what song it is, can you do some of the arm movements? So then I can zoom in and to all my delight or whatever, because knowing that we'll take some of that and we'll lay it in as if it was part of the live performance when it's really not, it's not at all. And, or we're doing something to try to put a thread through this video. I don't know if it's going to happen, and again, this is like, I don't know what we're going to end up, but I have to capture things when I have the opportunities. So there was a scarf that kept reappearing. So I'm like, well, why don't we use this scarf? So even when we were walking around the cities and going to markets and in front of like churches, one of the dancers, I would have her pull out the scarf. I'm like, just do something with it. I'll capture it, because we want to create in our final video that's going to be an amalgamation of this 2-week trip. I need something like a connecting thread to help bring the viewer, keep the viewer like, oh yeah, I see that scarf, and then it's up on stage and then it's, floating in the sky or something. But I don't know how it's going to work out because we haven't done it yet. They've changed the song they want to put it to. So I have to work. I can't go back and grab any more footage. So there's sort of maybe a bit of an kind of I look at it like you throw a lot of stuff at it and then you're peeling back, you're sculpting back in instead of starting very small and adding, oh, you know what, it would be better if so we're not adding, we're taking away, but I have to throw a lot of stuff at it because I don't know when, like now we're several months later and I just learned the song. They were thinking about doing this too. We're going to use a different song and that's all good. It's all fine, but those are some of the things I'm deal with.
So I think that's a interesting point that after you capture, film is in many ways a subtractive process.
Yeah.
Right. You've captured what you think you needed initially, and then from that you take probably something like 1/200th, or maybe just 1/20th if you're lucky. But often, you're taking less than 0.5% of everything you've captured, and that's what you're going to end up keeping and using and having in the film. So it's very important to get B-roll and think about those concepts of continuity or elements that you want in there. So I'm very glad that you brought that up. In the few minutes that we have left, I'd like to bring up an aspect about contrast and haze, because I don't think we've talked much about that. So let me see if I can pull this in here. So this is a scene where, as you can see, we have a fair amount of haze. And you can see that from the lights and the kind of the smokiness there. And the reason that people use haze in film, or one of the reasons, is, and I don't even understand the reason it works, right? But it gives a volume to the light, right? There's particulate matter that it's reflecting on, and it creates an element that's semi-transparent, and you can see through it, but it's still there. So it's almost like thicker, like it has a more of in my mind, a kind of like presence. And maybe it gives light a bit more presence in the space, rather than just being a point source of some sort of like linear origin. And this spreads it out. And if you'll notice, this is the first shot, but this is not where they ended, right? Back to the idea of the 2 up, 1 down, in lighting of people's faces. They ended up over here, right? So you can see like what you capture in camera is not what you're gonna perhaps end up with, because you can push things around later and you can emphasize, oh, I want this part to be darker, I want this part to be not bright, but bright relative to the background. And sometimes actually brighter, right? Like you can, maybe these lights that you see above the character are already pretty bright, but then over here they look even brighter because everything else is darker, and they've increased the color saturation. So we're touching a little bit here on some color theory, and basically just increasing the contrast, but also selecting colors for emphasis of what the subject is, and motion will make a big difference here. So now this would require a significant budget, to get your lighting just right, to get your giant Hemi lights going on in the background to fill the light on the right hand side, using when you have a light in the scene that's actually being used and the audience can see it, it's called a practical. So we've got 2 practicals here, and then the other one is all kind of like, somewhere out of the scene are these other lights that are off on the right hand side. But back to the hazing aspect. We use a lot of haze in dance and theater productions where people will put in haze to give it kind of like a volume and a mystery. And I wanted to point out that there's another way to do this. Not exactly, and it doesn't have the same effect, but for when you have limited budget, here I've shot. This is the famous Mechazilla being harassed by the mannequin of doom. Or perhaps it's a collaboration, and one's just in the foreground and the other one is about to come greater on stage. Pick your own story. Now over here, I've actually used a different process to get the light into the sensor, and there's a subtle difference here. And I think actually, yeah, this is A on top. Yeah, so this is A is without. No, B is without. Yeah. So this was done. You see how there's like there's a higher brightness in this one than this one, and things are kind of like softer between these two things. And there's like more of a glow around Mechazilla in one than the other. That's done by taking, you just have your lens, right? I'm using a SLR camera, and I placed pantyhose over the lens. So you can go like this, and when you thin this out and you put it a little tightly on, and that's all I did, extra low budget, this softens the light that comes into the camera, and it softens also the edginess. So like over here, if I had set this up really well, and I had a pantyhose over this lens right now, there would be kind of a light glow around this, where it would kind of soften and reflect off the fibers of the pantyhose. And so something as simple as that can be used to soften edges, and it'll often also give a little glow to light sources, and the light will kind of reflect around the point source of light. Now, another way that people do this effect is they apply something which is called a pro-mist filter, which is a type of filter that has little tiny dots that kind of catch and reflect light, so that it doesn't go straight through the lens, on the outer front lens, but they scatter a tiny little bit, the way like when you're in the shower and the light comes through, the water particles kind of soften everything. So you can use pantyhose just to achieve that. And it's worth playing around with. You get pantyhose, scissors, rubber band, put it on and see what happens. So and it can create a kind of like a dreamier effect, depending on how many layers of pantyhose you have and how soft you want your focus to be.
If you had like colored pantyhose, would that put a different kind of like almost color filter on what you get?
Great question. How will we find out?
We'll have to experiment.
Exactly. So yeah, that'd be a great, if you have the time in the next couple of days, and you have colored pantyhose that you don't even have to cut them out. You can just put them on and just see what happens. So set something up, put those on and see like what effect it has, because that might be kind of interesting, or maybe it'll just it'll add a hue to just your lights in the bright spots versus the shadows. It might have a greater effect in the brights than the darks, but experiment and see. Also, interesting, the pantyhose is a kind of a grid pattern. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Mori effect, but it's like, you've seen it when you look at like two screens from a door, overlapped, and you start seeing a pattern in the screen. I think I can pull it up from my chair over here. I don't know if the chair has like a little background. Is there like a pattern that's forming there? Is it too noisy?
You can see it.
Yeah. So anyway, that's the Mori effect. So the Mori effect is another combination effect that happens with when you have a gridded kind of pattern. It doesn't have to be a linear grid. It can be curved like the chair grid. But the pantyhose will, depending on how you tighten things, since it stretches in both planes.
I can't hear you very much. Did something happen with your mic? Just seemed like you got very quiet.
How about now? Is that better?
No.
I didn't, maybe. Did I
That's
touch
better.
it?
Yeah.
That's better. Okay, maybe I accidentally touched my my thing. So I was just saying that I'm curious what happens if you can do the experiment, see what happens with one pantyhose, colored pantyhose, and then we'll see. Film is an experimental process.
They also have some patent pantyhose. That might be interesting.
Yeah. Oh, also, yeah, if you have, experiment with all that and see what happens. Let me think. Well, just for completeness, in the notes it says pantyhose, 4K versus pantyhose. They're not just for timing belts. I took some mechanics class, and way back they pointed out that if your timing belt breaks, sometimes you can actually use pantyhose as a temporary replacement. And I don't know if it works. You'll have to trash your engine to test, but that's why that's written up there. I've never had to use that, fortunately, but maybe it's a good idea to keep pantyhose in the car. And then regarding 4K, right? So 4K has a super sharp quality to it, and it'll make things kind of like tack sharp. But then if you want to soften that, you might be shooting in 4K and you might be like, I want this to be softer without changing the resolution of what you're recording at. Consequently, it might be advantageous maybe to try to put the pantyhose on your lens when you're like, I'm still shooting 4K and I want to make it look like it's softer, or perhaps even make it look like I'm using a different lens if you don't have a lens available to change that. So that's another way of playing, is to say, I'm shooting at this resolution, but I want it to look like this resolution without changing anything. So that's kind of like why I brought that up. And we discussed already the different resolutions there. And I guess in the last minute here, I'll talk a little bit about data storage. We spoke about it before, that if you're going to shoot 4K, then you're going to be using a lot more memory in your filming. So there's also something called the bit rate in the camera. And that is how many, there's bit rate and there's bit depth. It's actually a longer discussion, so I'm gonna not go into that right now because that might take a little bit. And also, I don't know if that's too technical. I don't know if people really need to know that. I guess I'll summarize by saying, use the highest bit rate that you have available. That'll give you kind of the best quality. You can downgrade it later. But in bit depth is for color. And if you want a lot of color and you're going to be manipulating things later, then you want a higher bit depth. 8-bit, 10-bit, 12-bit are kind of the limits right now. And those are correspond to color depth and how much post editing you'll need. If you have a slight gradation and you want to have a nice smooth gray or fall off color, then you want a high bit depth. And if you have something that's more cartoonish and it's like a flat color, and you just like Frank's shirt right now, which is like just mostly solid red, then you'd be like, okay, I don't need that much bit depth because I have a pretty solid color, versus I've got a lot of subtles and grays like Frank's background, which has very nice background grays. Then you might need more bit depth in order to catch the subtle gray gradations that go across. Okay. Thank you for attending.
Yeah, so wrapping up, I guess if we wanted to do homework is our pantyhose test. And I'll do some pantyhose test and put it in the Discord for workshop 4. So anyone watching later, again, I encourage you to do the mini project 1 that we talked about, which was contrast, and pop it in Discord, and then experimenting with pantyhose and also pop that in the Discord. So yeah, email us if you have questions, and we'll see you hopefully on Tuesday of next week. And Tuesday is from, what time are we doing Tuesday?
Great question. I should know.
I think 12 until 3.
Pretty sure it's 12.
Yeah, I think it's 12.
So Tuesday, 12 until 3. And what will we be talking about on Tuesday? We'll have Jenny back with us, doing a presentation and discussion. And really we're talking about, open my juxtaposition, more about haze, lighting and color spaces, and equipment, golden ratio, color space. And I think we can also talk more about bit rate and what all of that means.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Have a great weekend.